Nationally and internationally, worldwide audience wanting to know why this 10-year-old was killed.
I looked at this little boy and thought, that could be my brother, that could be one of my cousins, that could be someone from my family.
The person at the other end just broke the news straight away that, look, Damilola went to school yesterday, and he didn't come back home.
Mark Williams-Thomas is a criminologist and former detective specialising in child cases. Hi, Rav. Mark, good morning. Now, this is where he died. This is completely changed beyond all recognition, but that was a massive estate over there. There was a derelict stairwell, and that's where that poor kid lost his life. We know where he died, but what happened before that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to imagine, isn't it, as the scene was then. Some of the places still exist. Obviously his school, which is just up round the corner, and the library. And what we do know is that he left the school, he went to the library to use the computers, and then he left the library, and it was from the library that he came home. Usual route, which is literally, you know, a couple of minutes walk from down there. And obviously as he left the library, he thought he'd be home in a few minutes and he'd be able to carry on his life.
These are CCTV images of Damilola playing outside the library before going in to attend an after-school club. He then left the library, taking his usual route home. Walking along Blake's Road, Damilola was 400 yards from his home when he was stopped and surrounded by a teenage gang. Police believe they tried to steal Damilola's silver jacket. When he refused to hand it over, they stabbed him in the leg using a broken bottle.
And the attack happened in one place, but he actually staggered on from there, didn't he? Because he didn't actually die where he was attacked.
No, well, of course, when you get injured to the degree that he was stabbed by a bottle. The impact was of such that he was bleeding to death, but he didn't result in immediate death, so that there was a small time period for him to then try and gain attention from somebody, and that's clearly what he was going. He was going to try and find somebody.
The gang of youths had left 10-year-old Damilola alone to bleed to death.
Little did he know what he was going to suffer, and in fact what Peckham was going to suffer, and how that legacy was going to be left.
And they needed to be able to clear out the evidence from below. So in other words, everything around them, they needed to make sure that that was secured, whether that be CCTV, and of course that's improved massively now, to make sure that there was anything else left. Sometimes perhaps offenders bring things to the location with them, so there may well have been something left by them. And also to try to establish what the pattern was and what the timeline, and timeline is really important when you're looking at a crime.
One of the key things I became involved in as a police officer were door-to-door inquiries, but relations were difficult between the police and the public. The previous year, an inquiry into the murder of 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence called the Metropolitan Police institutionally racist. I felt the tensions walking the beat in Peckham.
And of course it was so difficult for police to get anyone to come forward. What I found was two distinct types of people. You had those that just didn't want to know, wouldn't talk to police, yet you had the others that had come over years before in the 60s from the West Indies or Africa or something, and that was their home, and that was their community, and they couldn't do enough for us. They were so helpful, and there's no middle ground.
No.
And I found that so frustrating that there was so many people that just didn't want to help.
And I'm sure they used to open the door and shut the door in your face and say, look, I'm not prepared to tell you anything. All those ones that, you know, you find out yourself, I won't help you. And the problem is when you're living with that, it's like, well, who's going to come forward and talk? Who's going to give me some evidence? Because they know what the ramifications are. They know that if they give evidence, that will require a statement taken. It may well require identity parade. It certainly will require, if their evidence is believed, going to court and having to give evidence in court. That is massive, and not something that happens overnight. It takes months, sometimes even years, to get to court.
Now, of course, there's mounting pressure for this case to be solved, isn't there?
There's huge pressure. Any senior investigating officer, that's the person appointed by the police to oversee the investigation, is under pressure from day one from senior officers. And they would have been saying, right, to get this case solved, have you got any witnesses? Have you got any suspects in relation to this? And that puts considerable pressure. And of course, that pressure then goes down the scale, right from the very top of the senior investigating officer all the way down the troops.
8 months after he died, on the 26th of June 2001, 4 youths were charged with Damilola's murder. This was largely due to eyewitness testimony provided by a young witness. She claimed to be here on Blake's Road when it happened.
This 14-year-old girl gave them some real key evidence and gave them some direct evidence. And by direct evidence, I mean she actually saw offenders. So it wasn't something that she'd heard. She was told by somebody else. She actually says, I saw the offenders commit this act and I saw them run away. And at that point, she gave a number of names to the police. And it was those names that the police then started to act upon. Her evidence was fundamentally flawed, and it was flawed on the basis that there was inducement as could be seen as her giving evidence, and that inducement first of all related to a £50,000 possible reward that was on offer for her. She was given mobile phones, she was given clothes by the investigating officers, and the problem is as soon as you start to give things to a witness, it's very easy for the defence to turn around and say that was an inducement. The reason you gave this was because you were enjoying that lifestyle, and that's the evidence you gave. So it may well have been her evidence was correct, or it may well have been parts of her evidence were correct. That was never going to come through with the way that she was handled by the police.
None of them had been tried for Damilola's murder before. However, all three had been originally arrested in the first few weeks of the investigation in December 2000 and released without charge.
The new senior investigating officer came in and said, let's look at this in a completely new way. Let's use a new fresh pair of eyes to look at this. And what he did is he sent the forensic evidence to an external laboratory and he asked them to look at it. And that's where the evidence came from, because what they found is they found some blood splatter on the trainer, and they also found some other items in relation to clothing, and some cross-examination on that showed some fibre exchange. They were starting to build evidence from DNA in relation to a match between the victim, Damilola, and the potential suspects, offenders, on their shoe. And there was now a point where they needed to explain how did that blood splatter transfer from body to shoe if they were not at the location. In a simplistic way, the difference between murder and manslaughter is the attitude and the intent to do it. So if I were to kill somebody and I turned up at the location with a knife, with the intention of killing that individual, or I was reckless as to do so, but I still intended I'd formed that basis of it prior to attending, then that could be a murder charge. But on the manslaughter is when they get to the location, they didn't intend to kill them, they may have intended to rob them from something. But as a result of the actions that they carried out, the individual died, then that could form the basis of a manslaughter. And that's what the view was, because there was never any evidence given both by the prosecution or the defence that the bottle was taken to the crime scene. It was believed that the bottle was found at the crime scene, and that was what was used to commit the killing.
On the 9th of August 2006, Danny and Ricky Preddy were convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8 years each. When the verdict was read out, Ricky started shouting at the jury from the dock.
Where we have to go through the sadness of somebody dying, something very serious happens, we must make sure we learn lessons. And I have to say, from the Damilola's death, you know, very, very sad as it is and shocking, but as a community, an awful lot has been done to move forward from that and to try to make sure it doesn't happen again. And certainly when it does happen, and if it does happen, things aren't dealt with in the same way as they were back then.